Welcome to another episode of the Balanced Advisor podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Travis Perry. Today, we have the pleasure of having Bill Keene with us in the studio. Bill is the founder and CEO of Keene Wealth Advisors, an IRA headquartered in Overland Park, Kansas. Bill founded Keene Wealth Advisors as an independent RIA and has since built the fast-growing firm to 25 team members, serving over 800 client families. KWA is a planning-centric firm and is focused on financial retirement literacy through mediums such as his long-running 170-plus episode podcast, Keene on Retirement, regular education webinars and live events, and his Amazon best-selling book, Keene on Retirement, Engineering the Second Half of Your Life, for which the second edition has recently been launched. Actually, if you're listening to this, is really just the other day. So that's awesome. It's up and going. A unique aspect to KWA is a focus on advising engineers, as well as deep community involvement, devoting time and resources to various charitable causes. Bill is also an instrument-rated pilot and uses his plane for business, as well as providing charitable flights for those in need. Bill, it's a pleasure to have you here on the show.
Very grateful to be with you, Dr. Perry. I'm a huge fan of your work. Huge fan.
Thank you. It was great to get to meet you here in the pre-show a little bit and hear of your story. And I know we both enjoy flying. You get to fly at 30,000 feet of your own accord. I get to be in the passenger seat for most of those flights. But how did you get started in this industry? How did you become such an avid flyer? Let's talk a little bit about your story.
Sure. I remember sitting on my father's couch. I was about 11 years old, and we were waiting for his unemployment check to hit the mailbox. And it's interesting how you remember things from when you were younger, but I just can see that so clearly. And I remember the anxiety that he had. We lived in a very small apartment here in Kansas City. My parents were divorced. I didn't realize it at the time, but he suffered from a bipolar disease. And so a young boy living with his father with a lot of strain and stress. And specifically, I internalized the financial aspect of it. I don't know why I did, but I had a ton of anxiety around that. And from a very young age, I realized, gosh, I would love to be able to solve that problem for him somehow. But when you're that old, you have no idea how any of this works. But I started asking around, and just a few years later, I found out that a finance degree would be what that focus would be. So I just had this obsession to get through high school, go to college. I went to nothing fancy, a state college here in Missouri, University of Central Missouri, got a finance degree and just pursued that with vigor, and got out of college, worked in at a mutual fund company called 20th Century back in the day, because it was 20th Century. It now has changed to American Century as we went into the 21st century, and spent about a year there. And I was a data entry clerk. I mean, that was when a fund called the Ultra Fund was very popular. They couldn't open the mail fast enough to get the checks deposited. And they hired a bunch of people, young people like me. And I realized pretty shortly that I wasn't able to give advice there. I had a series licenses, but it was a no load fund company. So I literally left the company and cold walked brokerage firms. And I remember calling my future soon to be father-in-law and telling him that I'd left my job, Dr. Perry, because I wanted to cold walk brokerage firms so I could give advice to people and really determine my own destiny, which I could see in that short amount of time. Even though American Century was an amazing place to get my foot in the door into the industry, I needed to have a different arrangement. So I was hired at a company called Dean Witter. And you might remember it. They used to have offices in Sears stores. And I was transported out into the 83rd floor of the World Trade Center in the early 90s. Now, I was there a month after a Ryder truck drove into the World Trade Center and detonated a bomb. Now, this is very much before 2001 occurred. And so there I was, a kid from Kansas City. No idea, no assets, no money, no resources, no influence, didn't know anyone with money. And here I am in the 83rd floor of the South Tower in training with Dean Witter, basically given, a phone book and told, kid, you're not going to make it, but we have to hire a certain amount of you. So yeah, good luck. I say in my book that my life was like the first half of the original Wall Street movie before Bud Fox goes wrong, and the entire movie Pursuit of Happiness with Chris Gardner played by Will Smith. So
Totally.
that's the
And
quick
I'm like,
version.
this
Travis.
sounds so familiar. That's exactly where I was going. Very
Yes.
cool. So how did you end up being the owner of, such an amazing and influential firm? Then like bridge that gap for us.
I always had an instinct inside that if when you started out that way, and luckily it's not like that today as much, or if at all, where you're just forced to eat what you kill. You have a salary that's diminishing away after 18 months, not much of a salary, by the way. And if you don't get a certain amount of clients and households, you're required to take anyone, because you have to meet these minimums to survive. I know some of your listeners will remember those days and maybe went through it. But I always thought from early on, it was just me. I had to take 100% responsibility for my success. And there was no one else that was going to make it happen for me. And like in some of the insurance-based companies that still yet today are hiring some of the young people coming out of college, part of their process is, hey, give us 100 people that are friends and family, and we're going to call those first and try to solicit those people. And in most cases, or a lot of cases, don't make it, but yet the firm gets to keep a few of those leads and, whatever, pursue them. But I was the kind that said, if I have to call my friends and family to get these accounts to make it, I'm not going to do it, because I know they're only going to go so far. I have to figure this out on my own and learn how to grow business and attract clients. And from early on, I realized if I could eventually, it doesn't happen all at once, it takes time, but if I could eventually work myself out of some of these roles and hire people behind me to help me make introductions, to be my assistant, because at that point you're your own assistant, you're your own marketer, you're your own everything. And you don't have a book of business, you have a half page of business if you're lucky. And we might talk about this a little more in the episode, but I still wake up today 30 years later at some point thinking, have I made it yet? Have I made it yet? It was so ingrained back in those days of being afraid, or just knowing that it was still a question mark. But so over the years, I spent about 20 years plus in that, I call it wirehouse. I think your listeners know that term. Our clients don't necessarily know what that means, but in that model. And while I learned so much in that model, and I have a lot of gratitude for that, the folks that allowed me to work in those places. I was a managing director at one of the large firms for the last 10 plus years that I was in that model. I talk about this in my book, but I don't talk too badly about it, but I did see that there are conflicts of interest in the brokerage model, and that there are a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of layers of management and a lot of inefficiencies, all of which me as a quick start entrepreneur, they say I'm a visionary as well in some of these personality profiles. I just knew that I needed to have my own firm and to eliminate the conflicts of interest and all the different layers of bureaucracy. And forge out on my own. And we did that in 2014, coming up on 9 years ago now.
Your story hits home. I know for many of the advisors who are listening, come from different walks of life or different, entry points into the industry. Very similar story coming into a Northwestern Mutual, trying to, they throw you against the wall and see if you'll stick, sort of thing. And I had a very similar experience where a buddy of mine and we both looked at each other like, we're not going to go after our family and friends. And we actually took the phone book of our own accord and we bought lists and we drove to people, and we made warm markets out of, cold markets. And that's where we started. And we realized we had to be really great marketers in order to survive, and eventually great business owners. And that's the thing that I struggle with. And I know a lot of advisors struggle with, is you've got to be a planner and a business owner, right? And how do you do that? Do you really just focus on growing the firm? Do you really focus on being the planner? And there's pros and cons to both. And I like how you were talking about how, you have to take that personal responsibility. You've really got to make that your thing. and quit blaming everybody. But at the same time, the industry, right? The industry sometimes doesn't really help. The industry perception, the idea that you've got to look the part when you're straight out of college, it does something to one young advisor who's getting started. So I love hearing your story. It is very real. And I know a lot of advisors have been there and done that. So fast forward, we're here in 2022. You have grown, you have scaled, your company has truly been on the forefront of this, growth model. And what I love about this, and this is what I'll tell you, Bill, before I ask this next question, what I love about that is, had I found a firm like that 20 years ago, I may not be behind a podcast doing my own thing. I may have just been so happy to work for a firm that had balance, that had ethics, that had no conflict of interest, that I could be a planner and just help clients with their goals. Obviously, my life has had some different turn of events, but that's what I was looking for, is a firm like yours and others who I bring on this podcast. And I want to emphasize that this is the reason why I like having you and others on the show, is to show us, how did you do what you did? So let's talk about how you've been able to scale your business, how you've been able to do this in a balanced way. Basically, you're kind of a poster child for balanced growth. So let's pull back the curtain a little bit. Tell us, what did you do that was good? Like, what has worked? And we'll talk struggles as well, but let's start there with the positive.
So I think early on, I had a mentor. His name was Nick Murray, and I know a lot of your listeners, including you, probably know Nick. He's still out there. Does a great job with his newsletter, but he had a book, The Excellent Investment Advisor, and he's had a couple since. But his philosophy for a young advisor coming in was very helpful, because there wasn't a lot of consulting and counseling back 25, 27, 30 years ago, let's say. And part of his process was, early on for me, it said, he asked you a question and he said, "Who are you? Who are you?" And you say, "What do you mean?" And he says, What do you believe? Who do you want to serve? What do you think works? What do you value? Because as a young advisor coming in, if you're on the eat what you kill model, which thank goodness most people aren't now, you almost feel like you have to be a chameleon and try to serve everybody in every way just to survive. And what I learned from him early was, you have to know who you are and what you're about and what your belief systems are, and then create a process that's repeatable with a certain type of client that you're willing to work with, where there's a fit. So that whole fit thing is really hard to talk to a new advisor that's on that model, where they're just afraid they're not going to make it. But that idea of who and what we are is one of the first things that I think created confidence with me, and vision and intentionality about who I am, but what I would say yes to, but more importantly, what I would say no to. And it's really hard when you don't have a whole lot initially to say no to things, but to honor who you are. That's a huge part of it. And then creating process around it. In the old model, I call it the old model, the brokerage model, especially 10, 15, 20 years ago, financial planning was almost like, unheard of. In fact, some of the big firms still don't want their advisors talking about taxes or talking about insurance or estate planning. And in some cases, they even disable the software to a point where they can't give certain advice in their planning. And I always thought from an early point that it was funny, the first couple of years in the industry, I had 150, my first year I had 150 new households that I opened. I'll never forget it. And 2 of the households were worth more than the other 148 combined. And so I thought, well, just common sense tells me that what those 2 things have in common. In both those cases, folks had saved up money over the course of a lifetime and were at retirement age. And I said to myself, well, maybe I should learn pension distribution rules, the taxes, income tax averaging, how IRAs work, all those things, and become some sort of a specialist. So I've said 2 things now. One is know who and what you are, and know when to say no, and not to compromise your values, even when you're starting out. But then 2, kind of have a target market and learn that market and become a specialist. in that area, so that when you are meeting with people, if you have the good fortune of getting in front of prospects, which a lot of folks today, young folks coming to the industry, have no idea how hard it is to get in front of prospects. No idea. We've been able to create, through many years, it didn't happen overnight, but create some nice inflow of folks that are interested in working with us. But a lot of folks have no idea how hard it is to get in front of clients. But if you're not reinventing the wheel every time, and you have a disciplined process for information intake, questioning, first meeting, second meeting, third meeting, how you manage money, all that process enables you to actually start to begin to see that scale is possible. Those are kind of basic elements.
Sure.
But those things are, I think, foundational to having something that you can have some balance and feel confident in what you're doing.
Yeah. This is so important. I remember when I was doing some of this as a young advisor, trying to establish a niche and get a special, kind of a specialty going for myself. And I actually had a lot of mentors at my current firm saying, just, at this point, you don't need a specialty. You don't need a niche, and just go and get anybody. Oh my goodness. I took it the opposite. I said, no, I really want to specialize. I really want to focus so that I can, have a marketing platform to go from. And, regardless if you're a solo advisor working from home, if you're managing 25, 30 advisors on, in your firm and in your building, Kansas City, like regardless, or Kansas State, wherever you're at, the amazing part is that you can decide who you'd like to work with. I love that concept. And then decide who you are. But I think those two go hand in hand, right? Because you're going to attract the same type of person that you are, and they're going to be attracted to you or not.
That's right.
So that's a big part of it, right, Bill? I mean, people want to work with you and your firm because of what you stand for, and they're attracted to that. And I think a lot of advisors, they tend to think very closed-minded about, well, I can't have a niche. I can't have, a piece of the market because I'm leaving out all of these other potential. And I'm telling you, and you're telling us, no, don't do that, because you're going to actually resonate with that group better than if you had said, I'm serving everyone, right? And that's just how the marketing works. As you've built this up and as you've created scale, you've really become a rainmaker. You've become a rainmaker, I understand, because of your book, your podcast, the content that you're putting out. So let's talk about that. How having those content pieces really enables you to reach your ideal client?
You mentioned a moment ago about folks that will say no, that if you narrow your niche, and I have a saying, and that's, you narrow your niche and your market gets way wider. And folks go, wait, what do you mean? I narrow my niche and my market gets wider? Well, it just does. I just trust me on that. And if you think about how many clients you actually need to operate your business, and some folks, I heard one of your guests mentioned about recently about having 80 clients, 80 families. That's, would be an objective, one of the objectives. And even for, and there's no right or wrong way to conduct this business. I always say that. I always share what's worked for me, but I'm absolutely open to, that's not the only way to do things. There's so many right ways to do this business. But let's say that you're at a point where you wanted to have 5,000 families. Okay. Well, it's not millions. It's not 100 million families. It's 5,000 families out of all the people in the United States. So when you think about narrowing your niche and losing what you would be losing, it is a fallacy, I think, to think that, because when you narrow your niche, now I truly believe and have experienced and can testify today that my market has gotten wider. So I wanted to give voice to that before we moved on. And then also the folks that say no, thank goodness they say no. Thank goodness. That's the point. The point is they say no. And that's why, when I first launched the podcast 7 years ago, my initial thinking was, oh my goodness, I'm going to put my voice out there online. Unless we decide to take it down, it's going to be out there forever. Folks are going to be able to go back and hear what I say. They might not agree, These are just thoughts that I had in my mind. But you have to have the voice, and you cannot be afraid to have your voice heard and to take a stand. In some cases, when you get PR advice, public relations advice, they tell you to be controversial. Have you heard this, Travis? Hey, you got to be controversial, make a stand. Well, I'll do that if I really believe in something. I'm not just going to do it to do it. But we will, be willing to make a stand. And the other thing that I've found with having your content out there, now this does speak to your question that you asked. And I believe your question, correct me if I'm wrong, was just about how that content has made a difference. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So when you start putting out content into the public, yes, you cross your fingers and you hope that it's going to land well with the target audience. But you also start to build some brand credibility. And I think in our industry today that we need to be thought leaders. We need to establish ourselves as thought leaders in our industry. Now, I've got at this point, it'll soon to be 14, 15 advisors, probably within the first quarter of the year. And I have to, my mind now has to go from thinking about attracting the right client to our firm that's a good fit for our firm that we can provide value to in a big way. But it also has to be thinking about the advisors and the team members that we attract to the firm as well. So while depending on whatever your objective is maybe it's not to grow a large institution or a large organization with a lot of team members, but in my case, I'm wanting to make sure that what I'm creating out there as a thought leader is landing well, not only with my clients and potential clients and listeners that I may never meet, but also team members, current team members, and ones that we would be looking to attract into our firm in this time where, human capital is important to all of us. So, I mean, I could go a lot of ways with you. We talked a little bit in the pre-show about long-running podcast, over 170 episodes, a book that launched September of 2019, second edition just launched here as we're talking today. A ton of webinars that we put out, all very educational and non-threatening, non-salesy. One of the core values of our firm is we're not salesy. We are real down to earth people that folks can relate to. That's maybe that's a Midwestern value. I'm not sure, but that's just one of our core values. Another core value is that we're always growing and learning. That's another one. And while I'm on it, another one is that we're compassionate. And then the fourth one is that we're humbly confident. I always advise my team, don't ever get cocky. Never get cocky. We can be humbly confident, and they tease me a lot. We always talk, oh, that's a humbly confident thing, but it's part of the culture. And so all these things combined, whether it's the webinars, the books, the public relations work that we do, I speak at conferences, I do things like this today. I think it all speaks to that being a thought leader in our industry. And the other thing that it does too is that I know you do a lot of this work, Travis, you're doing a ton of it, is somebody asked me, how could you do 50 events a year? Now, I don't do all the events myself anymore. I have speakers that do it, other advisors. But in the podcast, it's constant. You do media interviews, you're doing other things, your own podcast, other podcasts, webinars. How do you do that? How do you do 100 appearances, 150 appearances? How that's got to be impossible. And my experience, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is it's easier to do 150 appearances a year than it would be to do 10. Because you are always up in stride. It's not you get in stride and then get out of stride and then get in stride and get out of stride. You're just always up in stride. You're a student of your business and you're a student of your industry and you're speaking about it all the time. And it makes it easier to actually do the stuff, because all the stuff we talk about, what I talk about, what you talk about in your book, Achieving Balance, which I absolutely love, it all preaches by the mile and it lives by the inch. Okay, so I can talk a great game, but when it comes down to doing it, I really have to look at myself and say, am I really doing what I say I do? Well, when I'm talking about it all the time and teaching others, it does make it easier to actually do the stuff, because we don't want to look like we don't put our money where our mouth is.
Well, exactly. And I let my clients know and my audience know I purposely work 25 hours a week, 28 hours max.
Yes.
Why? Because if I don't do it, how can I show my clients that this is possible? Like, it is possible, and you can triple, quadruple your business. We've done it every single year. But I think the big piece that you talked about there is, you've got a book, you've got a podcast, you've got speaking engagements, you're doing webinars. All of these things in combination are what your clients or, and contacts or and referrals are seeing. And then they're following you, they're listening to your podcast, and they're going to read your book, and they kind of hang out with you for a little while virtually. And then they engage like, hey, I like Bill. I like your philosophy. They like your company's core values, right? Likely you are attracting people who are also humbly confident. They want you to help them, and you enjoy that value together. So I'm big on values, as you know, as you read the book, and you're
Yes, I did.
fan. So I appreciate that.
Yes, I
So
did.
let's, that this is a part of it. And I help my clients break down, okay, and what do you start with? And I think you really start with the book, and then you go to a podcast and you do other things. But one thing does lead to another. And your second main point there is, well, if you're always producing content, if you're always on your game, then you're always ready. So I love that concept, because when we're done today, in a couple of hours, I'll be doing a client appreciation event for Buckingham Wealth. And yeah, we're gonna be talking the same kind of stuff. And this is warm up. So I love that concept. I love that idea. But let's talk about where you might be struggling. What would you say your biggest struggle is trying to scale this business, trying to improve it, get those 15 new advisors, bring on, more clients for the firm, so they're not out hustling, but you're the one really being the rainmaker? How are you doing all that without losing your balance? What is your biggest struggle while you're, trying to grow your business without losing your balance?
Yeah, perfect. One thing I might say on that last topic was a place that I think is a great place for somebody to start, because writing a book can almost feel like too overwhelming. I used a publisher, and they walk you through it, and they give you the outline, which is amazing. And a lot of it you speak, and you let a scribe it for you. But just having a blog where you do a blog post every couple of weeks, I'd highly recommend somebody getting started. Just do a blog and get your thoughts in order, and collect 6 months or a year of those blogs. And next thing you know, you start to see who and what you're about, and how you write, and you can go from there. The second piece to that I would always highly recommend is the thing that I think has contributed to some of our successes, is that I've been willing to make investments in the business, and to align with the right partners, so that I didn't have to do it all myself. And that's something that was early. It had to do with coaching, it had to do with consultants, and it had to do with folks that help me create content, and get it to where it needs to be. And it's helping me today, absolutely helping me today, so that it's not all falling on me. So to answer your question about a struggle, why do you have to go there? I mean, can't this just be all optimism
Right?
today?
It's
Travis, I mean,
it's all rose-colored glasses, Bill.
well, listen, here's how I look at it. I look at struggle as opportunity for growth. I really do. And it's always, if you ever been through something in your life, I know you have, because you wrote about it in your book, where you didn't think you were going to be able to make it through. There was conditions and circumstances that occurred. You couldn't see a way forward. You couldn't see a way backwards. You couldn't see a way up or down. And somehow, one foot in front of the other, you traveled the journey, and you made it to the other side. And you look back today and you say, I wouldn't trade whatever that experience might have been, at least from the aspect of learning that you can get through difficult times and get to the other side and learn from that. And I mean, the reason I updated the book is because one of the reasons was with the Secure Act, but then also because of what everyone went through during COVID. And I constantly ask my clients and listeners and followers to document things. So I was really encouraging them to document what they were thinking and feeling as we went through COVID, and the market was collapsing, and you didn't know if we all were going to perish, and all those things, those uncertain things, to document it, because there's so much learning and wisdom that can come from documenting how you felt during a tough time. When you make it to the other side, it'll give you confidence with the next thing that comes about. But to share with you, there were 3 meaningful times in the last, call it 10 or 15 years, where I knew something had to change. And we're speaking of struggle here. And again, struggle to me equals growth. But it's easier said than done, especially if you're in the struggle, because at the point it's not fun. But when you get past it, you look at it as a growth opportunity. But there was a point where I said to myself, I had to become an independent fiduciary RIA. There's no question, whatever the risks, whatever the investments are, whatever it is, I'm going. There's no question that we're not going to do it. And we did it right. And then about 3 or 4 years later, maybe a couple, 2, 3 years later, I was the ones that was in all the client meetings, me and my number two, Matt Wilson, who's been with me for 20 years. He started as an intern, Travis, and he's now the president and a partner, full partner of the firm. Started as an intern 20 years ago. Now he's the president and partner of the firm. He's an operating president of the firm. I got to a point where he and I were the only ones in all the meetings, 25, 30 meetings a week. And for your advisors listening, know what that means. It means you can't even really go to the bathroom between meetings. It's hard, it's stressful, and you're there, you're present, it's emotional, you're engaged, you care, and it wears you down to be in that many. It's not that we don't love and respect and honor our clients. It's just impossible to keep that cadence up. And I, at that point, been in it for 20 years doing that. And I realized I had to build a team. It was time to build that team of the advisory team out. That was the second time. I had to do it. There was no question. The third time that was meaningful that some might relate to as well is I was in the weeds. So here we are with a firm that's 20 plus employees, headed to 30 very quickly. I was in all the weeds of the business. And I got to a point where I said, I can't be in all the weeds. I don't like doing employee reviews. I'm a visionary thinker. I don't like being in the detail. I don't want to know how many copy machines we have or in any of the myriad of things that have to happen when you start building a firm that needs to be run with a real executive team and operations and compliance and so forth. And so I knew I needed a president, an operating president for the firm that would handle all those things. And these are periods of time, and Matt ended up being the person. We interviewed from the outside, and I realized he had what it took, and there was no one better for that role. So about 18 months ago or so, he became the operating president, and I got myself completely out of the weeds with one direct report. And I get to do incredibly fun and inspiring things like I'm doing right now with you. And I absolutely love the business. So here's the question. Those periods, those three things I just mentioned were called ceilings of complexity. Those were times where you either get to a point where you can figure out a way, if you want to move beyond the anxiety and the stress to another level, or you pare it back. And I would have simply said, maybe on that second one where I said, well, I don't want to meet with any more clients or as many. I'm just going to stop taking new clients. That would have been an option. That would have been an option to not take new clients. That's not in my DNA. So what's in my DNA is helping more clients and employing more team members and seeing how many people we can touch in a really amazing, positive way in this objective. But that could have been one of the things I said, or I could have said 2 years ago when I didn't want to be in the weeds anymore and I didn't like doing employee reviews and all the things that you have to do to run one of these firms in the trenches. I could have maybe sold the firm. Or I could have retired, or I could have said the ceiling of complexity, I don't want to move through it. But instead, I with wise counsel and a lot of thought, I felt comfortable delegating these tasks. And sometimes when you delegate, you kind of feel like you're delegating down to somebody you might have to check and recheck and so forth. I know you know Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan. They have a book called Who Not How. The concept behind what they talk about is you find the who's that are actually better than you. They're better than you. You're not delegating down, you're delegating up. And that has been amazingly freeing for me. So the question about the struggle for me now is staying out. And I don't know if this will relate to a lot of your listeners, but staying out of their way. Staying out of their way. I had my most recent EOS annual meeting with the team. We operate EOS within the firm, and basically they said, Bill, we want you to do one thing this year. We want you to take time off. We want you to block your calendar. We want you to honor it. We want you to trust us and stay out of our way. So that's my journey, Travis. And I don't know if that relates to many, but I'm just saying that's my journey. And frankly, that's inspiring to me. Like I got that advice from my team, which I take. Don't get offended by it, get mad and think, oh, you guys, you don't need me anymore, or whatever. And then I come across your work, Achieving Balance. I told my wife, I said, you got to order that now. And that was before that we had our communication. I want to hear what Travis has to say about Achieving Balance, because I'm still, even though it looks like awesomely successful and it's great, and I'm so blessed, I'm still struggling with truly maintaining the balance. I can talk a good story, but truly maintaining the balance.
We all are. And I think this is a great place to even end here, Bill, because we'll talk about planes, but in that book, that's exactly what I mentioned. Like this whole journey of balance is not so much like getting to the top of a mountain and that's it. Like it's an up and down, type of thing as we go through different phases of business and life, right? It's a times and seasons type of opportunity, but with just like an airplane. My dad always taught me as recreational airplane pilot, he said, we're off course 9%, 90% of the time or whatever. You've got to continually make course corrections. Now, of course, you have some upper hand, Bill. You're instrument rated. You've got some helps, but still the concept is true, right? You set your course, and a lot of times you get off. And it's that constant rebalancing, the recentering that I like to refer to as like, hey, let's rebalance, recenter. In fact, if you pull that book up cover that you had up just for a second, you look at those 3 stones on the right. Yep, those 3 principles really of priorities. If instead of having them stacked on each other, but you turn them toward you, like if I had them in my hand and I turned them toward you, now you could see that there's a center. The center is that top priority. What your top priority in life during the hardest periods of time. I have found that is when if I can turn to those highest priorities in life, and for me, that's my relationship with God. I turn to God, everything is okay. That doesn't mean that I'm always getting everything that I want. That doesn't mean that everything turns out the way that I think, because that's not a correct principle, but everything will be okay. My second layer is, am I taking care of my body? Is my physical body mentally, and just, physically, I'm like, okay. Because if I'm not, I can't help anyone. I can't help my wife. I can't help my family. I can't help my clients. Can't help my community, and everything from there really falls apart. So I'm with you. Like these struggles are opportunities for your business to grow, for you to grow, and keeps us back in balance. It's a constant battle. So I'm with you. And I'm supposed to be balance man, right. I'm supposed to be the guy that lives and preaches it. But we all struggle with it. And I appreciate your time. Thank you for being so free to share your personal story, your business story. It absolutely resonates. I know advisors who are right there with you in those weeds, trying to get out of them. And obviously we help them at the Make Time Institute. You provide a place as an advisor. You're a balanced advisor leader out there in the community. And boy, do we need you. So if someone wants to be in touch with you, I know you're big on social, you're on LinkedIn. What's the best place or way to get in touch with you?
Yep. Perfect. So, we have Keen Wealth Advisors on Facebook, and also Keen Wealth Advisors on LinkedIn. I also have a personal page on under Bill Keen on Facebook and LinkedIn. And then of course our website's keenwealthadvisors.com. And the book too. I've got the second edition of the book here.
Get the book. It's second edition.
Second edition of Keen on Retirement just dropped on Amazon here recently. So
good. Check that out. Also your podcast, Keen on Retirement. I love the consistency, the branding there. There's a lot of things we can learn. We can go in so many different directions, but thank you, Bill, for your time and for, making time to be here. Advisors, business owners out there listening, connect with Bill. You definitely want to get his book. You want to stay in contact. But if you love this podcast, share it, like, comment. Maybe there's someone out there who needs to hear exactly what we had to talk about today. Maybe that was you. So thank you for your listenership. Until we meet again, live life on purpose.